It's ad break time. I'm proud to announce the Beyond Solitaire podcast is sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. And as usual, they're up to some amazing things. Their next game, Hydrologic Cycle, is currently on Kickstarter, and you should absolutely go and check it out. CLGS also continues to offer classes in partnership with Gen Con. The next course, Jason Fury's Crowdfunding with Confidence, starts on May 6th and will teach you all about board games and crowdfunding. Go check it out. And I'll also include a final plug for myself. If you like the show and want to support it, you can do so by going to patreon.com/beyondsolitaire. Thanks to listeners like you, I've been able to keep upgrading my equipment, subscribing to StreamYard, and more. But for now, let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and this week on the pod, I have a very special guest. This is young adult author and now board game designer, Holly Black. She is a very big deal. I'm super excited to have her on. How are you doing today, Holly?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
I am super excited to have you on and very excited to find out that not only are you a literary nerd, but you're a nerd like us. But for people who don't know who you are, which I'm going to assume those of you who are not young adult readers in the audience might not, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your wider work?
So, I have been a fantasy novelist for about 2 decades now. I've published over 40 books, some of them for young kids, a lot of them for young adults, a few of them for adults. Um, and probably my best known work is the Folk of the Air series, which the game I'm going to talk about is based on. And the Spiderwick Chronicles. And there was a TV show out on Roku as of Friday for Spiderwick.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, really.
I was out of town. I gotta get on this. Excellent. So you've been a writer for a long time. Did you ever expect to design a board game, and how did that come about for you?
I probably should have thought about it, but I did not. So I have been a gamer for pretty much my whole life. I was deep into Dungeons and Dragons in my youth. I still play today, but like there was a time when it was, a huge focus of all of my time. In college, I had a big map of Waterdeep up on the wall. I had the old red box, like the first early set before it was advanced. It was just Dungeons and Dragons. Now it's, I guess, Dungeons and Dragons again. Um, and from there, just played a lot of games. I right out of college edited a gaming magazine called D8 Magazine, which was a tiny like startup where I would go around. It was during the rise of card games, sort of the end of live action role playing being like the dominant thing that was happening at like Gen Con, and moving into games like obviously Magic, but also Innomine and like a bunch of different Legend of the Five Rings, like that kind of stuff. So that was during the period where I was much more involved in like the actual business of games. And then I kind of went away and like wrote books, and in that weird way that you do, forgot how much I had been involved, in this industry. And at some point, I was asked about, oh, well, would you ever do something with a game? Let someone license a game. And I had been on tour. So I had this conversation like at the beginning of tour, and I thought, oh, I have some friends who've designed games. Like I could go and ask them. And then as the tour went, I was like, or I could just try. Like I could just try real quick. And then I was like, okay, or I could download a ton of books about gaming theory. And then I could come home and be like, family, I have made a game. Let's try it. And sort of that was part of like the journey of the beginning of me making this game, because that first idea of what a game was entirely wrong. Like my first sort of attempt at game theory. It's interesting. I really missed what made a game because I thought the game was the mechanic, and it turns out the game is the the wild, the wild sort of separate business. Like that's actually the stuff that makes the game work and fun.
So you mentioned that you looked at a lot of game theory. How long did it take you to go from thinking about this to like doing the prototype? And what did your first prototype kind of look like? So for those of you who are out there, this game is called Enemies and Lovers, and it is a tight little 2 to 4 player card game.
I probably should have said that. Thank you. um so I was interested in trying to find a way that I could link characters together. I thought that that was something that, like, one of the challenges, right, is not just, making a fun game, but like making a fun game that felt like the books. And they're romantic, they're sort of lush and decadent, and they're mean. There's a lot of backstabbing, there's a lot of murder and poisonings, and they're fairies, so they're also tricksy and untrustworthy and um things of that nature. So I was like, what how can I represent that somehow in a game? Um and I had this idea, and this is the idea I started with, where I thought, okay, maybe this is like worth something. And it has lasted the whole way, which is to have a hand, where's your cards that you are playing with, and then your court, which is your cards that you are sort of placing down and will eventually win from. But the idea of it being a court that you assembled, and therefore you had to link, like, a prince in this case with a conspirator, and you had to learn, link them by some means that was not necessarily, great. Like, for instance, knowing their true name, which is a very folkloric piece of business, but, nobody wants the other person to know their true name and therefore be able to control them. So that was sort of what I
Nice.
started with. And I thought, I got something. I did not have anything.
So how many iterations did you go through to get to this version of the game that's going to go on Kickstarter?
So I came home and I got like basically magic card backings, and I started putting little slips of paper into them with the rules. And that's what we just played over. I have no idea how many iterations, because I don't even know how to gauge it, right? Because I brought it home and I played it, and I immediately realized it was terrible. And then I came up with some more variations and more things you could do. And then I took it to my family, and I have a 10-year-old son and my husband who's been a longtime gamer, and we just played it over and over, and came up with different things we wanted to do and different things that turned out to be confusing. And then we started playing it with friends, and then started playing it with strangers, and just try to refine it. It's a lot like editing a book. You can't be precious about it. You got to throw things out, you know?
So we're going to circle back to that, but one thing is, so maybe it's an assumption on my part, but I do not think of authors as people who kind of workshop their work widely to a lot of strangers before publishing it.
Mm,
But with games, that kind of playtesting is really common practice.
right.
So, how did it feel for you to expose vulnerable work to large groups? And how did you figure out how to process that feedback? Because I feel like that's different from taking editorial feedback where somebody scribbles on your manuscript.
I mean, it definitely is, right? Because I am a workshopper. I have a group of people who workshop my books. Sometimes I'll workshop it with a group, and then I'll workshop it with several individuals. But it is true that they are all known to me. um, but I have certainly gone into situations where I didn't know the people I was going to workshop with. Sometimes you'll go to like a larger workshop, or you'll go to, just into a situation where you're with new people. Um, and so I try to approach it like that. I teach workshops too, and a lot of times those are students who don't know each other before this moment, right? And, you know, we always talk about like you have to look at the feedback you're getting and say to yourself, does this resonate with the story I want to tell? Right? Is this speaking to the story I want to tell? And most likely they are identifying correctly that there's something wrong, but most likely their solution is not the right solution. And so I sort of looked at it that way. Like, if people are saying there's a problem, there's a problem. You're not going to get away from that, you know? Um, but it doesn't mean that the thing they want is necessarily what you should give them. You just need to find a way to fix the problem.
It's hilarious that you say that because I have literally heard another game designer say something like that within the last like couple weeks. So it seems the processes are maybe more linked than you would think. So the other thing is that when you're taking playtest advice, I think changing wording or changing the order of events or something is maybe a bit different from deciding mechanically what to do, especially if you've never designed a game before. So what were some of like the biggest changes mechanically to the game that kind of came from playtesting with outsiders?
Um, so I had a couple of different sort of one thing I realized is that I had a friend who is a super, has many, many, many games, has played games over many years, and he had a lot of great advice for me, but he also super wanted the game to be more complicated. And so at some point, like I sort of introduced some things that in the playtest I really needed to shave off because they were making it overcomplicated. But the biggest thing I took away from the playtest was I needed to mark on the cards several things that I had never considered for no good reason marking before. There's a particular card called a trickster that can basically stop a lot of attacks. And the logic of what attacks it can stop is pretty straightforward, but they got nervous and confused and they wanted it marked on the card. Easily done, but I understand how that could be super stressful if I hadn't done it. And in the same way, there's a bunch of cards that like there's cards that are like draw two. There's cards that are like steal one and saying how many like do you draw and do this? Can you mark that on the card? I can, but I didn't, you know? So I think actually like putting a bunch of things on the cards that I had not considered putting there was the biggest playtest note.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. All right, so then I did want to walk back. So you mentioned that like editing for a game is a lot like editing for a book. How did I guess the drafting process for this game like feel for you in comparison with writing a daily word count or doing outlining for a book?
I mean, I've been writing for a long time. I have a lot of deadlines and this felt like playing and all I wanted to do was sneak away and do it. So it's really hard to compare it. I would be like, I do a lot of times like pomodoros where I'll like set time and then I'll write continuously for that time and then I'll have a little time to take breaks. And I was taking my breaks like looking up different things about games, like trying to figure out how to write rules because that's a very different kind of writing, that kind of technical writing. And just, so for me it was so fun to be bad at something and having to figure out how to get good at it.
Do you think that you will continue to design games now that you've done one? Like, have you caught the fever?
I don't know. I mean, it feels like I was so lucky to think of something that felt like my books that I don't know if I would like I don't know if I would luck into it. I would love to again. Um, I keep thinking like I would love to help um like my kid make a game or like do something where that felt really different than what I did do. I don't know what I'm gonna like. I still feel so deep in this. I'm like, will I do it again? I remember when I wrote my first book and I had sold it and I was super like I was waiting for it to come out and I was doing and my editor was like, you need to write another book. And I was like, another one. I just wrote this one. It took me so long.
40 books later.
Right.
So that kind of leads me to another set of questions. So, you created a game that's deeply intertwined with the
Mhm.
Folk of the Air trilogy. And like even just looking over the rules, because I've also read the books, it was very easy to link up the different mechanisms and what they represented and what the characters meant to each other. So I guess the first question is, how did you make the game feel like the books without overcomplicating it? And then in pursuit of that, were there things that you wanted to get in there that were left out?
So you could kind of link up a bunch of different people in different ways. I had a time when if you linked people sort of, for instance, they're the protagonist, there's a love interest, there's, a way that they are sort of linked. And I thought it would be cool to figure out a way to make that give you some kind of bonus or give you a special power. And I tried a version of it that did that, and that was too complicated. And just, I think, not worth, like, it was one of those rules that, you know, you could just sense that people's house rule would be leaving that out because
Yes.
because the thing, like it feels like extra,
Yeah.
and so I just cut it.
So when you're trying to like make games match up with a literary property, um, did that did that prevent you from, I mean, we talk about like, extraneous mechanisms and maybe trying to go too close to the plot, like sort of like when you're making a historical game, it can't just redo history, it has to have enough flexibility to still be a game.
Right.
um but what was the core feeling that you wanted your players to have, the thing that you were cut everything else out in service of that?
I want them to have that feeling of throwing down a card and really screwing somebody like like that to me is like that core game pleasure.
Oh, see, I'm a solo and cooperative gamer, so like I do enjoy screwing somebody over a little bit. But
We're
yes,
a whole
that
family. We just and I will say this for my son. He is, as a 10-year-old, he's very good at not winning. He because he truly understand, like he truly like has played enough to appreciate like the game.
that's fantastic. Also, I will say that having a very nasty game full of betrayals is extremely true to the books. So there's that.
But I think that was the thing I really, really I want it to be fun as a game, separate from the books.
Yes. Are you worried that instead of going from enemies to lovers, this will take people from lovers to enemies?
That is why it is called Enemies and Lovers rather than Enemies to Lovers.
So when I've seen some illustrations from
Mhm.
the game, and I looked up the
Oh,
studios that
Frostbite
you
Studios, yeah. Like
yeah,
what she goes
and they
by.
seem to kind of do a lot of literary themed art on
Mhm.
Twitter. How did you pick them, and how did that collaboration work for the game?
So I was looking at different one thing that I felt like there's so much character art here that working with an artist who actually knew the books would be the only possible way that they would be able to sort of engage with this amount of different characters and things. And also like for them to, I think, then get not just the characters descriptions but the aesthetic. And so I saw their work and I just super loved it. I also felt like I had pulled a piece and put it like into an early, draft of the game, and it looked so beautiful. Like it looked exactly right. It was like easy to read from a distance and easy to read small. And just like super elegant and fun. I mean, one of the things that I love the most is she did art like there's one for a card called Riding Toad, and it is a beautiful large toad with a saddle on it. It's so good. It makes me so happy to look at.
That's really really fun. So this kind of leads to a follow-on question, which is, you've this is clearly going to be a game that extremely appeals to people who liked the Folk of the Air series and who are very interested in the world of Elfheim.
I Yes, I'm hoping that they will be like beautiful art. I'm in.
You know what? That works a shocking amount of times. So I guess. But how do you hope that your game will pull in people who aren't necessarily familiar with the series? So, like, if you've got a family and one member of the family has read your books and the others have not, what kind of responses are you getting from testers who maybe didn't know the books but are willing to play the game?
um, I think that the fact that it's fast, um, quick to learn. I think it's lightweight, but there's some strategy. No little parts. No tallying. Um, I believe this will draw people in. I tried to make the kinds of stuff I like. I don't want to be counting, and I will immediately lose everything. And so I wanted it to be self-contained. It's not collectible. It is what it is. And hopefully it will be, fun to try to get the crown. Assemble your court. You need a prince, a conspirator, a coercion card to link them, and you need the one crown in the deck, Crown of Elfhame, which you can must steal, poison, and otherwise attack to protect or to get. And
Yes, by hook or by crook.
yeah, by hook or by crook, you need to get it in your court.
So, so you mentioned you enjoy kind of light, quick, easy setup, low overhead games. So, what are some games in that vein that you've been playing that have been keeping you hooked?
I mean, definitely our family play a lot of Exploding Kittens. And as a result, we also played some Throw Burrito, which has taught the concept of dueling. Very important. I don't know if you played it.
Fantastic.
Pretty great.
I've never.
We do love letters. I played some Coup, some Guillotine. My son loves Dixit, which is a very different kind of game, but super super loves it. Um, Cat Crimes. Just
That's really fun. Oh, I like that. I love the idea of like a good family game night. So when it comes to that, it sounds like that is kind of the core audience for you when you're playing games. Like you want to play with your family.
Mhm.
Um, who are you imagining as the core audience for Enemies and Lovers? Who is the ideal person that you picture playing this game
I mean,
or group
I
of people?
I know that for me as a long time like role playing gamer, one of the positions I often found myself in is with a bunch of people who were not, and who I had to extremely quickly get in. And so I guess for me, when I think about playing it, I think about somebody who, is a reader of my books and has taken a chance on this weird game that they saw on Kickstarter, and now they have it, and it has a lot of shiny foil, and they're with some friends who don't know the books and who maybe have some time, maybe they're at college, you know, maybe they're out in the world and, out at a bar or whatever. And they're like, you want to play a quick game? You want to play a quick game? You want to play a game and like, let's really get into this and let's have fun and be mean to each other.
Fantastic. It's a that's the right way to maintain all gamer friendships. So I do have a question. So I'm looking at the Kickstarter preview page, and you're the project creator, and it sounds like so Little Brown and Company is your publisher,
Hmm.
right? So I guess my question is, did you have to consult with them at all to do this game, or is this all you and you made all of like? Are you the publisher of this game as
I
well?
am indeed the publisher of this game. So when you sell a book, and for anybody out there who's considering, traditional publishing, when you sell a book, one of the things you're doing with your contract is you're negotiating what rights you reserve. And so, you can reserve game rights, you can reserve film rights, you can reserve comic adaptation rights, you can reserve audio rights, you can reserve translation rights. And all of these things are things that, you really need to actually think about. If you're not reserving, what are you getting in return for them? So there's my weird, if you're selling a book pitch, be careful of your sub rights. And so I have my gaming rights. And
Nice.
it turns out that right now, my book is not under option, which is great because actually a film option might well have put me in a position where I wouldn't have these rights. But we were
Really?
under option. Yeah, that's actually the big one. It's not your publisher, it's film adaptation. They often take the game rights too. And
Really?
I bet they would take, and I assume they would take paper game rights when they took really what they would be wanting to reserve as video game rights, right? Because that's, such a huge industry, equally the size of film. Um, but I think they probably would have taken the paper game rights too. But because I'm out of option, I'm in a position where I can make my own game, and I can do this thing, and we can print it ourselves. My husband's designing it. He did the line art for the back of the card, and so he's been doing like all the layout stuff. Um,
Wow.
and we've just been doing it together.
That's awesome.
And my agency is sort of helping me out, um, as you can see, because they talk to you, I know, uh,
Yeah.
because they are fascinated, I think, with like, how does this work? Okay, Holly, you're really going to do this thing? All right, we'll help you a little, and we'll watch what you're doing.
That's absolutely fantastic. So the other thing then is that I'm assuming that you have not contacted a printing press about the print of your own books or done your own layout. Have you done those things in the past?
Yes. So
Oh, that's so
I've printed
awesome.
yes, I've talked to a printer. Like I'm the person who's in contact with the printer. Yeah, no, we're really doing.
So for novels too, you've done that?
Oh no, never.
Okay, that's the thing.
No,
Like
this is my
so
first time.
oh man. So how did you figure out who to ask?
So I went online. It turns out there's a lot of resources for starting game designers. And I read a lot of read like all the stuff, everybody else probably reads. And I reached out to a bunch of different printers. There was a Kickstartered literary tarot deck that I
Yeah.
was a part of. Um, and I reached out to the publisher of that, and they were incredibly gracious and gave me a lot of advice and talked to me about the printer they used. And there's a lot of learning as you go. And I think that is absolutely part of what I love about doing this, even though it is scary. Because, yes, all of this stuff is not stuff I usually deal with at all.
That is really cool. Um, do you feel that it has impacted, I guess, your creative process to be behind all parts of the creative process?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like doing something super new. It is a reminder, I think, of, that you can do something really different, that there was a time when what I am doing now felt really scary and uncertain. And I mean, publishing is always scary and uncertain, but the actual process now, I know I know well, I know the industry well. And so to learn something just from the jump when I don't know any part of it is
Right.
is exhilarating and scary, but exhilarating.
So one of the things that people have talked about a lot in recent years in gaming is the possibility for games to tell stories
Mm,
and to contain narrative. So you come from the sort of narrative creation side of gaming primarily. It sounds like because of your past with Dungeons and Dragons and
mhm.
role playing. But there are also, I think, a lot of I guess we're having more increasingly critically serious conversations about board games and how we talk about them and what they
Yeah.
do
what they make people do, what they express.
Hmm.
As someone who is now both an author and a game designer, what sort of narrative and storytelling possibilities do games have that maybe are very different from what novels are able to do?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things. One is there's a participatory aspect where, like, one thing that you're doing in a novel is um you're having the experience of being, in some sense, a character and experiencing their decisions, but you are separate from their decisions. And in fact, sometimes it's incredibly pleasurable to go along with a character who is making terrible decisions, right? But there is something different about making those terrible decisions yourself. And I think that actually weighing your own decisions, figuring out what kind of player you are, figuring out what kind of way you want to move through a game, right, is a very different experience. Um, I think the idea that you can do things again and again differently is a way that you're experiencing a game that you're obviously not going to experience most books, right? The idea that something can have a different end each time, is interesting when it comes to narrative, and not always true. Like, a lot of games sort of funnel you towards one end, right? But there is the possibility of games with many different ends and many different ways of experiencing them. I had a friend who he made and I think he kickstarted these. They were cards, and they were story, and you could reshuffle them. And each time you reshuffled them and pulled a bunch, you got a different story. And the way he wrote them, they each time you did it, it made a story. And it was so interesting to hear. I went to a reading where he just did it, and it was just incredible to hear. And I think that games have that quality, right? Each time it's a different story.
Oh, that's a really cool way to put that. So that also leads to sort of, when now that as you're designing this game, you're still kind of doing things in the universe of Elfhame. Like, I know the Stolen Heir is about Oak grown up. Um but, you've also got this established series with established relationships between the characters. Is it strange to watch your readers not only read your story and interpret it or be like, oh, I hate you, how could you have done that to my favorite character, all the things that we do to authors, but also kind of co-create with you with established characters through playing your game? Is that how you feel it's happening? Like, do you feel like you've opened up your narrative for other people to kind of mess with a different way, or do you kind of separate what's going on with the game off from that?
So, I should have said my friend who did the interchangeable cards was Jedediah Barry. Um, but with this, I because of the way I had to structure it around the Crown of Elfhame, I, it really is a limited set of time within the books.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a time that has passed, and so people are participating in a way, but the books themselves almost are a version, right? This is how it worked out. And
Yeah.
so it does not move forward in time because this is really about, like, who becomes the king, and we know who becomes the king, but not
If you don't know, go read the
necessarily
books.
the only way it could have gone.
Right. The other thing is, I think, is really interesting about seeing a YA book adapted for games specifically is that I think the last time I saw statistics, what, 60% of YA readers, maybe more, are women.
That checks out. There's also actually a high percentage of adults who are YA readers.
Yes, I was going to get there. So I'm just interested in this question both when it comes to books and to games. So, when I look at my own statistics, I feel like I'm kind of an elder millennial. And I feel like one thing that's also very interesting is, you know, I read a lot of YA still, in addition to other things. I read like the full spectrum
Hmm.
of books, but I still really enjoy YA. Do you feel that your card game is most likely to be played by young people or kind of people already in that slightly older board game community?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure. Certainly, so my friend Cassandra Clare just did a Kickstarter for books. Um, but one of the things that she found was that a lot of her readers who were coming to Kickstarter had never Kickstarted before. And so they were like, what is this crowdfunding you speak of? you know? Um, because it just wasn't part of the ecosystem in which they moved.
Right.
And I don't know what will prove true for me. I know there's a lot of games on Kickstarter. I have backed a lot of games on Kickstarter. Um, but I don't know who of my readers will come along for this. And so I think it probably will be some degree of a cross section, you know, hopefully some young people, hopefully anyone who would like it. But I really honestly don't know, because I think part of the question is who is familiar enough with Kickstarter, um, and who plays games.
That's a really good part of that. I want to talk about maybe the gender distribution as well. So as we were kind of like laughing about before we went on air,
Hmm.
there are more and more women and people of color, and just the gaming community
Yeah,
gets more and more diverse by the year. Sometimes I feel like by the month. It's a great
right.
thing. But a lot of I look at my own YouTube audience, and I
Hmm.
know this isn't true for the comments I get, but it'll be like, oh yeah, like all your viewers are men.
Hmm.
And then when you think about kickstarting a game, are you? I mean, I know you play tested with a lot of people. Did you see any, I guess, interest among young women in playing your game in particular? And then also, do you think that your game will have strong crossover appeal for like the full audience of people who like board and card games?
So the way I wound up playtesting this, I was playtesting it with um, board gamers, because I was reaching out to, I have a friend who runs like a local game night. And so I was recruiting from sort of a pool of people that I could find that I knew played games. Um, and then I played sort of individually with smaller groups or people who maybe weren't as familiar with games. But I think in my experience, gaming has always been more diverse than its representation. As a like I'm a Gen X, um generationally, Gen X person generationally. And as a woman going to Gen Con at that time, you know, there weren't necessarily, a ton of women there, but there were always, women in these spaces. You know, um and I think that they're not necessarily always, though, going to conventions. And they're not always going to the same kinds of conventions. Like, I think I go to sort of your science fiction literary conventions, which have a very different demographic than like Comic Con, which is incredibly diverse, right? And has grown more so over time. And so I think it's always hard to know who is actually playing the games versus who is making the narrative about who is playing the games.
I like that. That's a good answer. Yeah, I think about that myself. I'm actually sort of quietly hoping that this game will get people who get it for the books to contemplate getting more games as well. So, kind of speaking to that, there are books that get made into games. So, there's a Red Rising game a few years ago. Things like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, like,
Hmm.
high fantasy stuff easily translates. Did any of your fellow authors express surprise that you were doing a Folk of the Air based card game? And also, do you think that there will be more projects like this coming up the pipe?
I mean, I really hope so. Yes, I think a lot of people were surprised that I was making a game. Um, I think in part because we all are, we're all working, we're all sort of like, okay, what's your next project? What's your next thing? And to do something that is sort of different and sideways. I think they're like, wait, what are you doing over there? What's happening? Um, and you also have that moment of being like, okay, I need to convince you of the legitimacy of this game. So, you know, like we're gonna sit down and play. And when it's actually fun, there's that moment of not just of like surprise and relief. Like with each person, because they're like, okay, you're doing this. Is this a good idea or a bad idea? And
Great idea.
so it's been great to actually like then be like, hey guys, will you play with me? Will you, give it a try? Will you give me some feedback? And people have given, again, great feedback over time. But yes, much some real surprise. And do I think people will do it? All right, here's my pitch. If you are a novelist and you're listening to this and you make your own game, think about it. You're automatically reserving part of your gaming rights. Come on.
I hear that. So, you used the word legitimacy earlier. Like the legitimacy, I guess, of like making a game and making sure it's not some sort of crackpot idea. But I also find it very interesting to talk about the legitimacy of games like in relation to other media. I think that, and this is also, I think that sometimes YA is unfairly seen as less legitimate than other
Mhm.
types of literature. So, I mean, it may
Luckily,
just be that you're kind of used to it.
yeah, luckily
But
I came up in fantasy, so I was ready for it.
yeah,
I was like, oh, really? Another genre people frown on?
let's just frown at everything and never have any fun. But do you consider games to be a type of media that is, I mean, do you see it as expressive as, or as worthy of critical attention as the things that we read?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we are. So I wrote a book once called Doll Bones, which was about kids who were playing dolls, and the moment when you no longer are able to play dolls. And I realized that I had carried a lot of shame because I was a kid who really loved playing. When my friends wanted to stop, I really felt like childish. And it took me a long time to sort of process that feeling and realize that storytelling with your friends is not childish. Storytelling with your friends is a human experience that we have had throughout time and is incredibly rewarding. What it isn't, though, is it doesn't produce a lasting product. It is ephemeral, right? And it is not curated, it is not edited, it is, impulsive and sudden and, created in a way that is not able to happen again in exactly the same way. And I think that makes it hard to talk about academically, right? Because you can't point to it because it is a moment in time and it is gone. But that is also what is so precious about it, because it really is something that is about community.
Ooh, it's very interesting to hear it put this way. I definitely agree about sort of like the co-creation and the ephemeral nature of a specific instance of play. But as a historical gamer, I'm also like very fascinated in games as like historical statements. Like what kinds of setups are you creating, and
Oh,
like what does
right.
that, how do we interpret, through a game like a historical period, or like forces that push people politically?
Right. That is really interesting because it is something that I think a book cannot do. Because um, a book is taken as it is. And so if a book has for instance, if a book has a political bent that you don't agree with, you're going to notice. And very likely, I mean, it can take you in a way where like, um, let me take something non-political, like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? Which has Christianity sort of baked in, and which you might not see, and therefore has a kind of thing under the thing.
Yeah.
But by and large, it's easier to see that stuff, I think, in literature rather than it's true in a game. If, for instance, if you have a game about, um, how great of a serial killer can you be? you are taking on a position, right? In that case, not a particularly subtle one. And I don't think anyone would come away from that being like, an advocacy for murder. But it's true that, like, if the winning conditions of a game are um not ones you necessarily agree with, you might not notice.
I actually just want to come out in support of women's wrongs because I haven't played it yet. One of my most like hot on my list of play. It's called Deadly Dowagers, and it's about murdering your husbands, plural, to become increasingly wealthy while not getting too much notoriety for their disappearances.
I actually think I believe my friend has that and he wants to run it, but he is like, we've never had a chance to do it. I'm so excited about that game. At least I know it was old. I know he had a game that was old ladies and we were going to murder some people.
That sounds great, honestly. But yeah, kind of on theme for what we sort of talked about on and off throughout the interview. When you are reading a book, you're presented with a narrative where the
Mhm.
events are set, and you can kind of read. Everybody's going to have a different take on something that you write. Like I'm sure you're used to lots of different takes on things you write, because a lot of people have read your books. But you can kind of do your best to get at authorial intention and like try to
Yeah.
figure out what the writer meant. With games, that is a little bit muddier because it's because the players are active
Right.
participants. It it changes how it feels, even if the designers set you up to do specific
Right.
things, because
Right.
once you're in it too, you're like complicit as opposed to just sort of consuming.
Sure. I mean, to win my game, you need to poison people. You need to attack people. Like, that is part of it's true that, like, you need to betray people. Like, that is part of the sort of baked in structure of the game, is that if you can't play nice, you know. Um I don't think there's a way to, to move through it that doesn't involve doing some harm, and that is a choice. But it's true that it's an obvious one, and I think what you're talking about are ones where it's much less obvious, right? Where you find yourself doing things and you don't necessarily know that's where you were going to start.
Indeed. I like it when a game kind of brings something out of me, that I maybe
Mhm.
didn't expect. I think I'm a nice person, and then I play games. I'm like, oh, I had that in there too.
You
But
choose
I
kindness. See, it's not as valuable if you don't have to choose.
and then sort of one more question about, I guess, your game and then your books in general. So, the Cruel Prince is set in fairy,
Mhm.
and it's a very interesting, I would say, very nice blend of accepted fairy lore and then your version of things. How fairy do you think that your game feels, and kind of having those like conventions of the land of fairy as part of the backdrop? Did any of that make it into your game, and how?
So I had a lot of conversations actually, with my husband when he was doing sort of the border design stuff, about what it meant to be in fairy. And I think the thing I landed on is this is very high court fairy. And when we so it is less like, the numinous sort of small creature strangeness of fairy. Um,
Yeah.
and as a result, I think it is less folkloric in that specific way,
Hmm.
because it is royal crest crown stuff. I think it has some high fantasy business that does not necessarily feel fairy like, but I think there's, a lot of whimsy in it, and a lot of like strangeness in that sense. Like, you can steal someone's whole court and switch it with yours. Um, and you can, let's see, you can grab from the discard. You can do a bunch of you can make everyone show their hand. You can do like these kind of big whimsical moves that feel fairy to me.
Very nice. And then just the sort of obvious question: when is this hitting Kickstarter?
May 1st.
May 1st. So we are recording this just about a week out. But
Mhm.
those of you who are listening, this is running the day before. So I will have the kind of launch page in the show notes so you can go check it out. But just a couple softy questions before we let you go.
Uh-oh.
So I
All
normally
right.
ask people, what game is currently giving you a lot of joy? But because you're an author, I also want a book recommendation.
Oh my gosh. Let's see. What game? So, um, I think Guillotine is probably the thing that we had not played as a family before, and I wasn't sure how much I would love it. I had a friend who like super super loved it, and we're deep in now. It's there's a lot of there's we have played it like through a couple of times, and we're starting to like there's a lot of littler rules. And I admit the first time we played it through, we were like, okay, this is just cut off people's heads. This is great. And then I was like, oh, there's a lot of actual there's some more stuff to do here. Um, I'm trying to think what else. I feel like I just got a game that everyone has been playing for a long time. I think it's the sushi game that everyone's been playing
Sushi
forever.
Go.
Sushi Go, which we never played. And
Yeah, that's a very cute game.
very cute. Um, and then so the game that I am really excited about trying that was on Kickstarter that is a big game and very different is Old King's Crown.
Oh yes, Pablo is wonderful.
That
I'm
game
very excited
probably
about
I
that game as
mean, I
well.
am super excited about it. So beautiful looking.
Yes. Yes. And mechanically, I I know it's had some changes since the last time I played it, but it is looking good.
Yeah, it looks so good and very different, and that's one that I do not think we will I don't know if my son is ready for, but, like, I'm really excited to actually, like, play it with friends.
Fantastic. And as is true of the of enemies and lovers on a small scale, this one's mean. It's excellent.
So excited. I'm so excited.
And then a book rec. I know you've got lots of books you could
Oh
recommend,
my
but what is
goodness.
bringing you joy this moment?
Um, I'm trying to think what I read recently. Let me see. Oh gosh. Okay, so my friend Lee Bardugo's book came out recently it's called The Familiar, and it's really lush and really beautiful. It's historical fantasy, and it is I can't recommend it highly enough. So beautiful, so good.
Fantastic. And then just for people who want to follow your work online, where do you most like to be found?
You can find me on Instagram, where I think I'm Holly Black, but it might be Black Holly. I'm sort of one of those two. And I'm on and my website is blackholly.com.
Perfect. Holly, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and talk to us about your game and about your work in general and just the lot of it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, everybody out there, if you're looking for me online, I can be found anywhere as Beyond Solitaire. So please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.